Mr. President, it's hard to read or to listen to the news these days without hearing about Russia's interference in our American democracy, hearing about its influence peddling, about the misinformation that it's been spreading on social media. Well, I have bipartisan legislation that would address an aspect of this. This legislation is co-sponsored by Senator Todd Young, and it's legislation that would give law enforcement the tools that they need to create greater transparency about foreign individuals and entities that are operating in the United States in the interest of other governments. And it would make it easier for the public to better track information they're receiving, particularly from governments that are hostile to the United States. This bill would give the Department of Justice necessary authority to investigate potential violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is also known as FARA. We've heard a lot about that. This was legislation that was passed during the 30s as there was fear about the rise of Nazism and Hitler in Germany and the effort to spread propaganda in the United States. Well, this would allow the American public to clearly trace where information is coming from and who is paying for it. I think in this age of misinformation, that's especially important for the public. At a time when our law enforcement officials, foreign policy experts, and leaders continue to grapple with the extent of Russia's intrusion into our democratic elections, this legislation is more urgent than ever. The need for this legislation is perhaps most clearly demonstrated by the case of Russian propaganda networks like RT America and Sputnik International. Both networks continually propagate and share content and programming that's designed to very subtly confuse and influence audiences worldwide. And if you've ever listened to either of those channels, you will know that there's just this subtle difference in how they present information. But in the United States, RT America is available on cable TVs across the country. It's considered to be one of the most high-profile assets in Vladimir Putin's vast $1.4 billion propaganda machine. According to an assessment made public by the U.S. intelligence community in January, RT is the Kremlin's, and I quote, principal international propaganda outlet, end quote, and it's integral to Russia's information warfare operations across the globe. The Kremlin selects the staff for RT and closely supervises RT's coverage, including disinformation and false news stories designed to undermine our democracy. If you have any question about that, watch RT here. It's on the cable network here in the DC area. RT News has publicly boasted that it can dodge our laws by claiming to be financed by a nonprofit organization and not by the Russian government. Well, recently, the Department of Justice asked RT America to, in fact, register as a foreign agent. RT rejected an entirely reasonable request from the Justice Department to respect our laws. They refused to register. And how did we respond? Well, we continue to allow RT America to spread its disinformation and false narratives. This is unacceptable, and we responded that way because we don't have the teeth that we need in the law to be able to enforce it. And that's what my legislation with Senator Young would do. That's why it's so important. It would strengthen FARA by giving the Department of Justice authority to compel foreign organizations to produce documentation to confirm funding sources and foreign connections. This new investigative authority was requested by the Department of Justice, and it's supported by the Government Accountability Office, the Sunlight Foundation, and the Project on Government Oversight. This is a good government piece of legislation. In fact, if this authority were in place today, the authority that we have in our legislation, the Justice Department could immediately investigate RT America and publicly expose its ties to the Kremlin. In the absence of such authority, All the Justice Department can do is to ask RT to voluntarily adhere to FAR regulations and hope that the propaganda outlet complies. What are the odds of that? Pretty slim. Clearly based on RT's refusal to comply with FARA, the Kremlin is well aware of the limitations that are inherent in our law. Now, as we wait for this common sense legislation to move forward, the Kremlin, RT America, Sputnik continue to wield their harmful propaganda and attempt to influence the American public. Since the publication of the intelligence community's January report on Russia's interference in our 2016 presidential election, we've learned that Moscow spent millions of dollars buying ads on social media sites and search engines, often using the very clips that have been aired by RT on its YouTube channel. Last week, representatives of American social media companies testified before Congress and illustrated the lengths that the Kremlin went in order to deceptively spread divisive propaganda, all seemingly without a trace or any clear indication about the origins of these ads and RT's news blasts. The misinformation included numerous reports run by RT News on supposed U.S. election fraud and voting. So they spread, and they clearly intended to spread confusion about our election in 2016 to try and encourage people to believe that our elections don't work, to undermine our election process. They talked about machine vulnerabilities. They claimed that the results of U.S. elections could not be trusted and did not reflect the people's will. And sadly, too many people saw those stories and believed they were real. These are not just random examples of fake news. These stories are part and parcel of a broader influence campaign designed and directed by the Kremlin's leadership and peddled by government-funded trolls in St. Petersburg and other front organizations. So in the same way that Russia is building up its military force, its navy, its ability to operate in space, its missile program, it's also built up its propaganda campaign in ways that are designed to undermine Western democracies. And if we don't pay attention to this, then shame on us. We are, of course, a resilient democracy. We are confident that our values and institutions will prevail in the free marketplace of ideas. And our Constitution, unlike Russia, protects the right of individuals and organizations to spread Russian viewpoints, disinformation, and even outright lies. But no organization, including RT America or any other front outlet for a country that is hostile to the United States, has the right to conceal a foreign funding source and thumb its nose at the requests from our Department of Justice. The American people have a right to know if RT America is a Russian propaganda organization that takes its direction from the Kremlin. They have a right to know who's funding those programs and what kind of misinformation they're spreading. To that end, I urge my colleagues to put an end to the Kremlin charade by supporting the Foreign Agents Registration, Modernization, and Enforcement Act. Let's give the Department of Justice the tools it needs to investigate and expose RT America and to fight back against the Kremlin's interference in our democracy. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.